Steel City. Is everybody ready to go? Let's proclaim the greatest radio show.
Welcome, fans, to our Week 16 Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Sella, here with J Dash, the fantasy guru, although his fantasy team took a giant deuce in the bed this year.
5 wins, man. And you beat me by 1 point, and Easy beat me twice. My team shit the bed twice against Easy, and if I would have just beat him those times I was in, but then my team scores the high points last week, obviously. They actually scored the highest points 3 weeks in a row, and I actually have more points than JK47 at this point in the season, if you count the playoffs, too. I hate fantasy football, to tell you the truth, man. I hate playing it. I don't mind giving some info out about it, but actually playing it makes me mad.
It definitely makes me mad. I was the highest scoring team, not the highest scoring, but one of the highest scoring all year, and then I get 65 points and lose. It's garbage.
Please believe it. All right, let's get started here, man. The situational starters, we average 14.43 points per non-quarterback. We have Bilal Powell going into New England this week. They led up the 13th fewest points to fantasy running backs. We took Justin Forsett last week against New England. He had an okay week, better than his first week. But Bilal Powell has blown up over the past 2 weeks. 229 yards and 2 touchdowns just on the ground. Last week he had 11 catches for 78 yards in the passing game. Forte was active, but he was extremely limited. And Bryce Petty out there is check down city. That's all he does is check down. With Bilal Powell in the game, that's huge for him. So I expect another good week out of him. We have Willie Snead going up against Tampa Bay. They led up the 16th most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. He has 14 receptions on 19 targets with 161 yards over the last 2 weeks. One of those games were versus Tampa Bay as well. That 2 weeks ago, he had 6 catches for 85 yards. And Breeze was actually terrible in that game. New Orleans scored just 11 points, but Willie Snead still came up with a solid game. He actually has 6 or more targets in 9 of his last 10 games this season. And then we have Zach Ertz, tight end for Philadelphia, going up against the New York Giants. They led up the 12th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. He had 1 double-digit fantasy effort through his first 8 weeks of the season. Now he has 6 over his last 7 games. That run started actually in New York against the Giants. He had 8 catches for 97 yards, and now he has 36 targets over his last 3 games. He is definitely Carson Wentz's go-to guy right now.
I like Willie Snead going up against the Buccaneers. The Saints offense is wide open. The Buccaneers offense is wide open. This is a prime game for a lot of points, a lot of fantasy points. Brandon Cooks hasn't been the guy he has been in the past. It's mostly been Willie Snead, at least over Cooks this year. So I'm going to go with him. Tampa Bay's defense, they're all right, but they're not great. Division matchup, it's going to be an exciting football game.
Yeah, like I said, the last time these two played not long ago, it was supposed to be a high-scoring game, but it wasn't. I think this time around it will be, but even if it isn't, like I said, they scored just 11 points in that game 2 weeks ago, and he still came up with 14 fantasy points.
Why is Todd Gurley projected to get 23 points?
He's going up against the San Francisco 49ers. That is why they can't stop anybody. Fitzgerald.
Well, he got 5 points the last time he played the 49ers.
Yeah, I mean, he really hasn't had that great of a season, but you look back over the past couple of weeks, the 49ers have been getting torched in the run game, and I actually think Bilal Powell was one of those guys, possibly.
Believe it.
So, yeah, they've just been getting torched in the run game. That's why. But if it was Fitzgerald Toussaint, he'd be projected to get 23 against the 49ers at this point.
Sweet. So I'm playing a dude who has Aaron Rodgers, Ezekiel Elliott, and Todd Gurley, and they're all going to blow up, and I'm going to lose, and he's never even set his lineup.
I didn't say Todd Gurley's going to get 23, but they're projecting him to just because he's playing the 49ers. I don't know, man. Does he have 23 points in any game this season? Maybe once or twice.
I really don't know. I don't think so, though, because I've had him most of the year on my one team, and he's done nothing.
Let's move on to the sleepers. We're averaging 12.63 points per non-quarterback, and we are averaging 24.2 points per quarterback. We have a quarterback here, Tyrod Taylor, going up against Miami. They actually led up the 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season now. He didn't have a huge game last week versus Cleveland. McCoy was the one to really blow up. He ran all over Cleveland. But it should be a lot tougher for the run game this week up against Miami. They're pretty good at stopping the run, so they should have to pass more in this game. And if you look in week 7 at Miami, Taylor had one of his best 3 fantasy efforts of the season, scored 27 fantasy points, only had 1 passing touchdown, but he also had a rushing touchdown, ran for 35 yards, so I think he can have a solid game this week. We have Kenny Britt versus the San Francisco 49ers. They led up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. He has 9 or more fantasy points in all but 2 games this season, 6 or more targets in all but 1 game, and he has 53 targets over the last 6 games. Jared Goff, he's been terrible really since he took over as the quarterback, but it really hasn't killed Britt. It might have hurt Britt a little bit, but he's still throwing the ball to him so many times that he is getting fantasy points each week. So Britt has been playing well, and we have Malcolm Mitchell for the New England Patriots going up against the New York Jets. They let up the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They ain't bad at stopping the run, but they can't stop the pass this season. Now, Malcolm Mitchell, he had 3 good games in a row, maybe even 4. He has 4 TDs over his prior 4 games before last week, along with 27 targets. Just 1 catch last week, but it was in Denver, who has one of the best pass defenses in football. And if you look against the New York Jets last time, he scored 2 touchdowns, 5 catches for 42 yards. And I expect a big bounce back week from Tom Brady this week because you do need to pass to beat the Jets. And I think Malcolm Mitchell can have a good week. I think we're going to talk about Chris Hogan in the deep sleepers here. Edelman, I think, can have a good week. And Michael Floyd might actually step up and play a role in this game as well.
Floyd, his blood alcohol level was like 0.271. He was asleep at the wheel of the car at like an intersection.
Yeah, and it wasn't in park. Pretty funny.
He's an idiot.
Who are you going with?
I like Malcolm Mitchell. I agree with you. I think Tom Brady's going to come out and play really well this week. I think the Jets are complete pieces of crap. I think New England likes to make the Jets look like pieces of crap. They got Bryce Petty at quarterback. Blau Powell's the only thing they got going for them on offense right now. They're probably going to tear it down and rebuild next year. Todd Bowles, the coach, might even be fired in New York after the end of the season. So they have nothing going for them. When Darrelle Revis is one of your worst defensive players, you're having a rough season because that dude's been a baller for most of his career. I don't see it this year. The Jets are terrible. New England's not. It's going to be all Brady, and there's no reason Mitchell couldn't get 2 touchdowns again.
Believe it, and I think Chris Hogan can too, and that is one of our deep sleepers. They are averaging 10.9 points per non-quarterback. Now, Chris Hogan had a similar week last week to Malcolm Mitchell, and really over the past month or so, because he had double-digit fantasy points in 3 straight games, scoring a TD in each of the previous 2 games prior to last week. Again, against Denver, one of the best pass defenses in football, just 1 catch for 18 yards. So him and Malcolm Mitchell have been putting up similar numbers over the past month or so. You look, 5 catches for 129 yards and a touchdown against Baltimore in Week 14 for Chris Hogan. It was his biggest game of the season. So Tom Brady is spreading the ball around out there. And we know Tom Brady isn't very good in Denver. So I think there is definitely going to be that bounce back this week that we were talking about. Another guy, Marquise Lee, going up against Tennessee. They let up the most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. He has double-digit fantasy points in 7 of his last 10 games. He scored on a kick return touchdown last week, so you can get points that way as well. He has 3 touchdowns total in his last 5 games as well. Marquise Lee is Blake Bortles' favorite target out there right now because Allen Robinson really hasn't been doing too much this season. And the last guy, a guy we took last week as well, along with Marquise Lee, is Dontrell Inman going into Cleveland. They actually let up the 15th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. That's why fantasy doesn't tell the whole story, obviously. But Dontrell Inman, 9 or more fantasy points in 7 straight games now, 6 or more targets in 7 of his last 8 games, 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games. You can see this guy is playing very well right now, and Cleveland is actually worst against slot receivers, and that's what Dontrell Inman is. So I see a big week out of him. He did pretty well last week. I see a bigger week this week.
I like Inman. This guy can ball. He's going up against Cleveland. Anybody going against Cleveland can have a good game. The Browns are in complete disarray. They're just god awful. Hugh Jackson's apparently not going to get fired after the season, which is surprising to me. But I've had a firm belief all year long. If you're betting or playing fantasy, just go against the Browns and you'll do well.
And it's worked out pretty well so far.
Believe that.
So I gave you 9 players. You said Willie Snead's going to have a good week. Malcolm Mitchell is going to have a good week. And Dontrell Inman is going to have a week. You said 3 wide receivers. We also mentioned a running back in Blau Powell, a quarterback in Tyrod Taylor. I did want to put a tight end. Oh, yeah, I did put a tight end. Zach Ertz as well.
Mad choices. Every time you come to the spread, you get the best fantasy info out there.
Although we got a thumbs down last week.
They probably just didn't know how to click thumbs up. They were too stupid to figure out which one was thumbs up. Maybe it was Dracula hanging upside down. Who knows?
All right, wrap it up, Mr. 65 points in your championship game.
It was the semifinals, fool. Fans, questions or comments, hit us up on Twitter at bet_the_spread. Hit me up on Twitter at betjimthewin. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/betspread. As always, go to YouTube, click subscribe, win your fantasy, make money. We got to set my daily fantasy lineup to win $500,000.